One main reason for this is the emphasis on self-learning that is based in university, which is not found in school learning. In addition, there's increased workload, there are a lot of things that we can done in university, and also different modalities that are available for them. So all these reasons can make it quite challenging for an undergraduate. And it is our aim through this project to provide some of the essential skills that will help an undergraduate. One main reason for this is the emphasis on self-learning that is based in university, which is not found in the school more than in addition, there is workload, there are a lot of funding now each will all and also by the modalities that are available for that. So all these reasons can make it quite challenging for an undergraduate. And it is our aim through this project to provide some of the essential skills that will help an undergraduate. One main reason for that is the emphasis on self-learning that is based in university, which is not found in the school more than in addition, there is workload, there are a lot of funding now each will all and also by the modalities that are available for that. So all these reasons can make it quite challenging for an undergraduate. And it is our aim through this project to provide some of the essential skills that will help an undergraduate. One main reason for that is the emphasis on self-learning that is based in university, which is not found in the school more than in addition, there is workload, there are a lot of funding now each will all and also by the modalities that are available for that. So all these reasons can make it quite challenging for an undergraduate. And it is our aim through this project to provide some of the essential skills that will help an undergraduate. One main reason for that is the emphasis on self-learning that is based in university, which is not found in the school more than in addition, there is workload,
asking yourself, what do I know about this? If you have time, just glance through the topic in a textbook. Okay, just glance, just at least the headings. Because the prepared brain, the prepared mind is able to absorb more. That's the principle. The prepared mind is able to absorb more. So if you just spend just less than 5 minutes just to prepare, you will absorb much. What do I know about this? If you have time and during the lecture, head up and pen down. Topic that is you're looking at a textbook. Okay, just glance, just at least the headings. Because the prepared brain, listen to the prepared mind, listen to the slide, is able to absorb more. That's the project. The prepared mind is able to absorb more. So if you just spend just less than 5 minutes just to prepare, you will absorb as soon as possible. What do I know? That usually we give. We try to. If you have time and during the lecture, head up and pen down. Try to complete your note. Okay? You complete your note. And when you do this, automatically you're learning certain content areas, right? This whole process itself helps to, you start learning things from the very beginning of your lecture. Now, how do you make notes? There are several techniques. You decide on the technique, but try these out. One famous one is the corner method, where you divide the page. You divide the page. There is you have the cues or the clues or whatever, the major key points, and then you have the place where you add your notes, and then you summarize. So some of these you fill later on. During the lecture, you're just filling these areas. And so we'll say about a disease, etiology. So you might say etiology. So here it might be diabetes mellitus, etiology. So here you won't write word for word. You won't write in sentences. You just write etiology here, maybe genetics, maybe physical activity, body weight. So you just write the main points and trust your brain. When you write those main points, the key words, you see at the end of the lecture, you will remember the points. You haven't to write everything. Because when you're writing, you see, however you are,
excuse me, sir. Excuse me, sir.
Has to to the right process. And the brain,
Excuse me, sir.
mind can
Please bear with us a moment while we handle this technical difficulty.
Hello. Hi. Sorry, I got cut off. Yes. So I'm going to come without the video now. I think we got up to this. Can you all hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear.
Can you hear me up to this?
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. Fine. So let's put myself on. Right. Okay. So, okay, right. So, when you're making notes, you have different techniques. So, you have to try these techniques. Okay, so as I mentioned about diabetes, how you would write the title, then you might just make your points here, and then write the again not all the not sentences, right? And you see your notes. So it's important that you develop some sort of permanent notes. There will be certain individuals. I know there were one or two of my batchmates who went through the whole whole 5-year course without probably having about one exercise book of 80 pages, not even 80 pages of notes. They were just absorbing direct. For most of us, described here in further detail. You can read this. So this is important because you might have points here, you might want to add a few questions here, some diagrams and things. And here, when you finish the lecture, you would be feeling some of these, right? You can start having you start with a few words at the time of the lecture, but you can develop concise sentences, you can have your own symbols, abbreviations, lists, and so on. So mostly you fill these up. So these are not hard and fast rules, but this is the sort of where you build your note. Okay, so you build your note. So here also you'll be able to summarize key points, and these are all useful you when you start to revise. So this is some more, and this is a very good site actually. This is from News and gives on site. So
Please bear with us while we handle this technical
Okay. Okay, can you all hear me now?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, is that clear?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Can you all hear me now? All right. Okay. Right. So then the next one, I used to use this method quite a lot. That is out topics, and you just jot down according to the subtopic. So diabetes mellitus, etiology 1, 2, 3, clinical features 1, 2, 3, and maybe write a few sentences there. So that's another way of doing it. This is the sort of the type of things we often do in Sri Lanka, I must say. And this mapping method, this is something I used to use quite a lot. That is I try to map it so that, and there are techniques called mind maps. Mind maps is a trademark system of doing this. There are several books on mind maps where you write the topic in the middle, and then after that, you draw lines and have encircled subtopics, and from the encircled subtopics you can again have branches. You can have it this way, and you can have multiple branches. So diabetes mellitus, etiology, so you might say genetics, then you can say single genetic disorders, and then you can say polygenic or whatever, right? Then you can say diet and refined sugar, low fiber content, and so on. So you're drawing a map. Now, this is also a very interesting way of making notes. And if you practice this, it helps to make notes fairly fast. And the people who proposed this, Tony Buzan, is the guy who started this off, and triggers the visual part of your memory also, so that you start remembering the picture of the map, and that helps to remember. And also from this map you can start drawing connections. So if you're talking of we'll say the etiology, and there might be a clinical feature, and you might draw another line from one to the other, so it helps to bring in some discussion also into your notes. Then, of course, you can have charts and boxes, fairly simple. This is useful when you have charts like this when there are differences. So viral hepatitis versus leptospirosis. So if your lecturer is speaking on jaundice and viral hepatitis, differentiating viral hepatitis from leptospirosis, you might start having the notes in the form of a chart, right? Or later on after the lecture, you might develop this chart for you, okay? Or you can have things in boxes. So etiology in one box, clinical features in another box, investigation in another box, treatment, acute, chronic, or long-term. So you can use different terms. You see, this is where when you're doing your self-study, you have to decide on the classification or on the categories which are you're comfortable with. Okay. you're comfortable. So the idea is to learn the subject. So you have to be comfortable with. You have to follow precisely the boxes I have used.
Please bear with us for a few more moments. We are sorting out this technical difficulty. Till then, join. Please stay with us. We have a lot of things in store for you. and he will be back in another 5 minutes or so. In the meantime, while we are waiting for resource person to join, I'll give you a brief idea about how this project would go on in the following weeks. So each of these sessions would then be followed up by a post quiz that we will share through the chat box towards the end of the session. And that will be based on the content that was covered during this session. And you'll be given marks for that. So pay close attention to these sessions. And afterwards, during the coming week, until the next session that will again be on a Sunday, during that week, we'll be giving you certain activities that you can perform on yourself and then submit the answers. So that won't be very difficult activity, but it will make sure that you can apply what you learned during this session. So the sessions that we have planned for you, this particular session, you may
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Yeah, up to what can you show me the next slide? Yes.
This one,
Up
sir.
to what did you all hear?
This is where we stopped, sir.
Okay, right. Then the next slide, did you all hear about the next slide?
This is where we stopped. We actually did not hear what you said.
Okay, right, fine. Okay. So this slide shows you other ways of making notes. That's one thing, is to look at charts and then also to box your notes. So in your charts, for example, main topic or example would be compare type 1 versus type 2. The main topic could be diabetes mellitus, and on subtopic A, it could be type 1 diabetes. Subtopic B is type 2 diabetes. And then you'll be jotting down the points, the different points. So this you might do during the lecture, but most likely you will have time to do this after the lecture. Can you remember I told you have to prepare, then you do during your lecture, and after that you have to learn to complete your notes. Right. So boxes again is another way of categorizing. See, when things are given in chunks, it's easy for you to remember. Right, when things are given in chunks. So in when you give it in boxes, so subtopic A might be etiology. Subtopic B might be clinical features. Right? Subtopic C might be investigations. So you are chunking them, and then your mind is able to grasp it and remember. Right? Next slide, please. Right. So a slightly different strategy is used when we use for recorded lectures. Right? A slightly different strategy, because in a recorded lecture you can pause and re-listen and make your notes, but it's always important that you go through the lecture once, because when you go through the complete lecture you get an idea as to what the lecturer wanted to teach also. Right? Okay, so let's now we have talked about lectures. Next, we will do about study and how we should plan your study. Now, remember, though we use the term studying, it is in fact learning. Right? Just studying for 6 hours is useless if you are not learning from it. So in order to learn properly, you have to have certain, you can think of it in certain easy to remember ways of learning, right? So I'm not going to go into detail, but I will want again to give you main chunks about learning. So you have gone for your lectures, you have gone for your tutorials, and you have gone for your practicals. Now, when you go to hostel or back home, how are you going to learn? How are you going to use this material? How are you going to refer from the internet or whatever other resources and learn? So now you can classify this as timetabling, the importance of timetabling. Second thing is your environment, and then what exactly you would do during this process of learning. What would you do during this process of learning? So 2 points. One is these are extraneous to the whole process. That is, you should have some timetable. That's important. Okay? And you should think about the environment you're studying in. Now, next slide, please. So, next slide. Yes. So, if you are able to plan your time, it's always good to have it in a visible area. So it could be on the wall or your diary. Now, of course, most of you all have it in your mobiles. Okay. So you have to have at least a weekly timetable when it comes to your studies. Other things you might not want to, you might want a bit of freedom to be flexible. But when you look at your study time, as an undergraduate, you should have some sort of commitment to block out your other commitments but to block certain time periods for you to study. And when you are doing that, you have to chunk it. So you don't say, I'm going to study from 9 p.m. till 12. You chunk it, right? 9 to 9:30. Small break, 9:35 or 9:40 to 10:40 or 10:30, and so on. Now, in these, you should note what sort of topics you're going to study. That's important, so that you are covering all the subjects done during the day and during the week, right? So it's important that you chunk it and you include all the subjects. There are apps which can be used now in your mobiles or your computers. And also remember, you must have adequate sleep. Sleep is essential. In your timetable, you must have adequate hours blocked out to sleep. You see, it's during that time that when you're learning something new, what happens in your brain is that there are new connections being formed. And when you are sleeping, those connections get consolidated and the useless connections go off. So it's during the sleep, during the period of sleep, that what you have learned gets solidified, and you will feel fresh the next day, and you will remember things which you studied if you allow adequate sleep. Okay. Next slide. Now, this is a technique which is used for timetabling. That is, it's something to do with tomato farming, actually. So you have chunks of 20 minutes each. 20 to 25 minutes, right? You work, then you take a short break. Work, short break. Work, short break. Work, short break. Then you have a long break. After work, long break, right? So you see, when you're having such breaks, it helps to consolidate some of the knowledge. So you will learn a certain area, short break. Learn certain area, short break. Learn certain area, short break. And then you have a long break. So you're talking of chunks in your timetable. Okay? So the important principle is when you're timetabling, you timetable in advance, you timetable to cover all the subjects every day if possible, and you chunk it. You break it into pieces. Right? Okay. Next slide, please. Now, this is about the study environment. Okay. Now, again, this is a key thing. So, timetabling is one. Second thing is about multitasking. You see, you have to remember that your generation has many more distractions than our generation. We never had internet. We never had mobile phones. In fact, we didn't have television. We had only radio. Okay. So it was a massive transition for us. But you feel the difference. Because when we were without mobile phones, without televisions, and only relying on radios and a few transistor radios, you see, there was less distractions to your mind. We had less information coming into our minds. We had less tasks which we were doing at the same time. Okay? Whereas you fast forward and look at your lives, you have the mobile phone which is giving you alerts. You sit in front of your desktop or your laptop, and you can listen to your music as well as watch a film, and then do your look at some slides. So you have got exposed to a world where information is being bombards you. So from the time you're getting alerts, there are small surges of dopamine, and these have been researched by the people who are doing those alerts. They know that you get hooked onto it, right? You get hooked onto it. You are almost addicted to these multiple information packages which are coming in Facebook, in WhatsApp groups, and so on. And the urge to resist it, it's difficult. So next slide, please. You see, this goes back to the science of attention. When you are listening to a lecture or you're reading a book, your mind is giving attention to something. Now, your mind can give attention to something, one thing at a time. Your conscious mind can give attention to only one thing at a time. So when you're reading, if your mobile phone rings, your attention is broken. If there is a loud noise, your attention is broken. If you listen to certain types of music, your attention is broken. Why I say certain types is some people find it calming for certain types of music in the background, right? They have got used to it. That's a different story, right? But if your place where you're seated has a lot of other books and other things which draw your attention to, again, your mind is drawn to those. So, it's important that your environment reduces this multitasking, at least when you're studying. Okay? And in order to help you to learn to gain attention or to be focused, techniques such as mindfulness or meditation are helpful. Okay? And also, again, adequate sleep is important in this whole preparation of your mind to studying. And you should avoid stimulants. Too much coffee, too much tea, and all these drinks, the fizzy drinks, some of which have a lot of caffeine, right? Those will not help you in drawing attention, right? Smoking, alcohol, and drugs, no, right? There's no question about it, about using those, and those will cloud your mind. It will not make your mind clear. Okay, so these are some of the things in the environment. So we've talked about timetabling, the importance of timetabling, and then the importance of the environment. And the key one is to reduce multitasking. And then now, since you are in this new digital age, there's this concept of a personal learning environment, PLE. Next slide, please. Yes, now, that is, you see, in our period, times, we used to have books and notes and textbooks and notes. That's it. Okay. Now you have a totally different range of learning tools. So if you are talking of a topic or if you're talking of a subject, not only would you have your notes, you will get into the computer and you will have a whole new learning environment in relation to a topic. Now, I am no expert in this area, but I want to give you some direction to understand this. It is just like us having journals and our notes and having textbooks. You can also have a different set of resources for each. Certain experts speak would have your own notes. Some of you will be using iPads and making notes, which you will have now in your computer, in your cloud or in somewhere. Personal learning environment. So that's another environment which we have to acknowledge and you should seriously think about. Okay, so we talked about the environment, we talked about the timetable. Now, how do we really study is the next question. How do we really study? What's the process we would do to study? How do I study? Right? Next slide. Yes, this is one. Yeah, this slide. Okay. Right. So one is it should be a planned process ideally. So you should know I am going to study the presentations and management of diabetes from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. And you might not go into the details of chunking it, right? But you know that you have to at least look at the clinical features, the investigations, and the management, maybe 3 chunks, right? So why is that? Because then if your mind is prepared for that topic, this is what I'm going to study at the beginning, then you learn better. Right? Remember, it's not the studying time, it's what you learn. So if your mind is prepared to learn on a topic, you will learn better. Okay? So those are a few things. And then you start to, now you want to understand about the topic, right? Okay, next topic. Yes, next slide. Yes. Now you have to read. You have to understand. You see, why do you want to understand? Because if you understand something, you will retain it in your mind. It goes into your long-term memory. If you understand something, it will go into your long-term memory. And it is important that you get things into your long-term memory. Right? Why? Because then you have to study less closer to the exam because it's already in your long-term memory. Okay, so you have to read to understand. You will have to read your notes. You will have to read the books. You might want to listen to your YouTube channel, and you might indicate that in your corner note or whatever to check on that, right? And which we use to understand what's happening in a particular disease. You can use a mind map. Right? So those are visual ways of doing it. So when you try to read about a topic, we say diabetes, and you want to read and understand about it, there is what we call the 3R technique. Next slide. Yes. So you read a section. You read a section. Then you close that. And you try to recite it, speak aloud. Right? So you have studied about diabetes, epidemiology, and etiology, the book, and you see how much you can mention about diabetes. Right? Diabetes is defined in such and such a way. This is the sort of, it's common in such and such an age group, and we are seeing it increasingly in Sri Lanka and globally. You study. Then once you gain, okay, this is why 3R. And the more you do this, the more you will remember it. The more you will understand. Now, when you're reading this, again, it's not just words just to memorize and recite it. No, you're trying to read the section, and the problem for people, difficulty in fluency in relation to English. So when you read, you might have to understand, you might find it difficult to understand. So you will have to understand the words, the concepts in Sinhala or Tamil. Okay? And then slowly you will understand what the sentence means. Okay? With time, you will be able to think also in English. It will take some time. Initially, you might understand things easier and better in your own mother tongue, but with time, you will learn to understand these things in English. Okay, so it might take more time, and this is why study techniques are important, because during the first few months or years, some students will find it tough to understand the text. But please try to use a translator, a translation, translate the words and try to understand. Don't try to memorize. Don't try to memorize. If you memorize, it will, you have to memorize certain things. But if you're trying to memorize concepts, you will not be able to apply those concepts later on, because you will forget those. You cannot have several textbooks memorized in your brain. Okay, right. So that's about understanding. But at the same time, there are things which are required in your memory. Unfortunately, there'll be certain things which are required in your memory. So if you want to memorize, you can use various other techniques. You can use words. You might want to memorize certain words. You might have to memorize definitions, right? So course level is such and such. You have to know that. That you have to memorize, that it should be about a certain milligrams percent or millimoles, right? That you can't you can understand the principle, but you have to memorize that well. So there will be certain things which you memorize. And to memorize, if you think of those, when you're going around the road even, when you're walking even, you can think of some of these. You can recall some of these. And, that's useful. But certain things, it is important to verbalize. That is, you have to write it down or say loud. Now, for example, definition of diabetes. What's the definition of type 1 diabetes or type 2 diabetes? You might want to memorize those. You understand the principle, but you'll have to memorize those. And then you'll be able to state those. Right. Next slide. Oops, no, previous slide. Yes. Now, there are tricks for memorizing. The more you recall, the more it will be in your memory. The more you actively recall. That active recall is not to look at the book and try to read what the definition of diabetes is, but when you're walking down the road to think, what's the definition of diabetes? Or while you're walking, what are the features of ECG changes in a acute coronary syndrome? Right? Now you're trying to recall. The more you recall actively, the more it will stick in your mind. Okay? And then there are little tricks. You use mnemonics. A famous one is Vibjoy. I'll use this this is about the rainbow, the colors in the rainbow, right? Or prism, when the color gets white, light gets is broken down into these different colors. Or some of the mnemonics are on words, auditory. Oh, bloody Mac Perry was a mnemonic given by Professor Carlo Fonseca. When you want to look inside the eye, shining a light to look at the fundus, optic disc, blood vessels, macula, and periphery. These are the areas you must look at. Okay? So that's a mnemonic. So when you are studying, see, you have timetabling. You have talked about the environment, and I have talked about the process itself. That is, in the process itself, you're studying to understand, and when you want to study to understand how you do it, and then there are certain things you have to memorize and how you can memorize. Okay? But then you have to consolidate, right? Next slide. And that is when you do questions. You do questions, you quiz yourself, or you go to a group and you study. Let them ask you questions, right? And then that's how in your quiz, you can look at any sort of, some of these chapters give, after the book chapter, there are certain questions they ask. You can look up some questions which they have asked previously, and so on. So whatever questions related to that subject will consolidate what you have learned. Consolidate. And please remember, you should be asking yourself questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions from yourself. My former teacher, Mr. Errol Fernando, he died. He was a tuition teacher. He used to say, you ask yourself all the possible questions in that syllabus so that the examiner has no questions to ask you. I follow that even now. So whenever, even on any topic, I try to ask myself questions. Of course, sometimes there are lots of instances where others have better questions than what I have asked myself. But if you go on asking yourself questions, your views, what you have learned gets consolidated. Okay. So now are we okay for time? Is it okay, Priya? Am I going on?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We can go.
Right. Okay. So next is preparing for exams. Okay. And you see, when you're preparing for exams, what are you going to revise? How are you going to revise? And how do you know you have learned? Right? So what are the ways of preparing for an exam? What will you revise? How will you revise? And how do you know that you have revised enough? So next slide. Yes. So this gives you what you should revise. Strategic. Now, remember, one thing very important is you have to love your learning. You have to love your learning. So you have to love the work you're going to do. Otherwise, you're in the wrong place, right? You can't do something you hate for the rest of your life. Learn to love it. So learn to be inquisitive, learn to love your subjects, you have some certain areas you might not like. I also don't like certain areas, but broadly, you have to love what you're going to study. Okay. But when it comes to the exam, you're more strategic. You're strategic because now you have to pass that exam. So how are you going to revise to pass the exam? So very simple. You see, your exams are set by your teachers, and therefore the lectures by your teachers will be very important points for you to revise. Right? There would be outcomes, objectives, and so on given in the faculty notes, faculty staff handbook. But remember, it is the lecturers who are going to, the lecturers and professors in the departments who are setting the papers, and they are going to tell you things which they think are important. So what they say is going to be important for your exam, for you to pass. Point number one, look at the past papers, because they have set the past papers and they have thought through and thought those are the questions which are important to ask and things which are important for you to know. So therefore, go through the past papers, not to memorize the answers of the past papers, but to use the past papers to learn around the topic. Okay, learn around the topic. Don't just limit yourself to answering that question. A lot of students we have seen are memorizing answers to MCQs. Now the chances of you getting the same MCQ at the next exam is less than 0.0001. I mean, we don't repeat questions like that. And even if we repeat, out of the 100 questions you are memorizing, you think we are going to ask all those 100 questions, we are going to repeat? No. We might repeat 2. Okay, you repeat 2. So now you are studying 100 MCQs, memorizing the answers for 100 MCQs, thinking that there would be 2 MCQs which are going to be repeated. Absurd. So don't memorize answers. Learn around it. They give a clue to what is important because the examiners are setting those. Okay? So this gives you a broad picture of what you have to study. A broad picture. And you start to feel it as you go along. Last few days, you might be feeling the details. You have to learn to start revising. Use one set of notes or one book in a particular subject to revise, so that you are going through that. Because part of the notes you remember automatically as part of your visual memory. Right? When you go through, suddenly you can picture the page, what you have written. Or you might picture a diagram in the textbook, which helps you to answer. Okay? So this gives you what you are going to now revise. Next slide will tell you how will you revise. Preparation begins from day 1. Okay? Very important. From day 1, you should be reading your notes and finishing the work you did on that day. You might do sports, you might have gone out with your boyfriend or girlfriend, but you better come back and at least glance through your notes and recall what happened on that day. So if you have a timetable, you will be okay. You'll say, if you are youngsters, you will be breaking the timetable. We always do. That's occasionally we do. We don't stick to our timetables. Suddenly you might get a call from a friend who will say, Machan, let's go and see a film. So you go. But then, even if you go, keep half an hour or so just to at least glance through. So it's important. Preparation begins from day 1. And as I told you, you'll be studying to understand. Right? So this is, again, important, because don't worry about these facts, minor facts. You want to dump them in your long-term memory. If you understand, it will stick there. right? It will stick. And if you have it in your long-term memory, you will not forget it. Now, some of the things we have learned, we haven't forgotten. I mean, we can remember things we studied 40, 50 years ago. Of course, they have got reinforced as we go along. Then the other point is interweaving. That is, now if you are revising also, you don't revise. Now we'll say you have now got your study leave. You have got your study leave. How am I going to finish this revision? Now, you don't say, today is my biochemistry day, tomorrow is my physiology day, day after is my anatomy day. No. Interweave. That is, you have to do all the subjects, or at least a few of the subjects every day. Right? Because otherwise, the more you are not familiar, the faster you forget. The faster you forget. Right? So interweaving. So that is part of your timetabling. So when you are having your study leave, right? Study leave is just the last lap. You have actually started preparing from day one. You have started to understand from day one, but there will be certain things you want to understand during your study period also. Right? But during your study period, you will interweave. You will have different topics on the same day. Okay, so how will you revise? What will you revise? You can use your lectures, you can use the slides, you can go to the LMS and listen. You will have your diagrams, you will have the various flowcharts, the notes you have made, right? And also, this is the stage you are strategic. So you are now looking at past papers and trying to say what sort of areas are likely to come. So next slide, please. Yes, so you will know the areas you are now going to study, and you will use the lectures and diagrams and all these things in your revision. All right. Next slide, please. Yeah. So finally, now we are coming to the end of it. How will you check whether you have learned? Important point I told you before. Question yourself all the time. Even after a lecture, just question yourself. Don't be frightened of yourself. Okay? And there are other ways, like you can have flashcards which ask questions. You can use your notes. Your corner noting system is useful there, because there are certain things which you write on the left in your corner notes, those key points, 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you cover your note and you look at only the key points, you should be able to say, what are the things I have written in my notes? If I look at these key points, can I remember what I have written on the notes? Right? So you should be recalling. So even when you relax for 5 minutes and then another 5 minutes, you might say, right, I am going to recall what I learned today. And then might just, recite what you have learned. I have learned today about drug therapy in management of patients having type 2 diabetes. And these are the principles, right? Then, of course, you can have group discussions, because different people can have different points of view. They will have learned differently, and they will have their own questions. Okay? And, of course, past papers, as I mentioned. Past papers. Past papers from your faculty and other faculties also, or from books. Right? There will be past papers in other universities, and which you should be able to answer, right? Okay. So next one is the final slide. So what I've tried to do is to chunk 3 areas on the sort of studying which happens in the faculty. One is related to lectures. How you take the maximum out of lectures, and that is preparation before, taking appropriate notes during, and then completing your notes afterwards, because that becomes your document. Why is it important? Because it's the lecturers who are setting your papers. It's the lecturers who have decided what is important for you. Okay. The second point is about studying. So how to plan your studying? See how important it is about the timetabling, how important it is for the environment, and the key thing. Don't think that multitasking is good. Multitasking is not good for you to learn. It's not something which is all the cognitive scientists and people are saying no. Multitasking, as a general rule, is not a good way for a person who is studying. And then of course the studying process itself. You have to focus on, you love the subjects and understand it. If you have to really memorize, you might have to have mnemonics, and you might have to have certain most funny things which you try to visualize and so on to remember. But those are minor points, right? Those are minor things. Then preparation for the exam, starting from day one. How important it is to take timetable. How important it is to know what is the sort of area which they might ask, right? Because that's something which will tell you where to aim your studies. And then revise, that you'll be revising using mainly the notes, and use a single set of notes which you will use to revise, because then it becomes part of you, right? And of course, when you revise, always question yourself, so that I've asked all the possible questions which they can ask, which anyone can ask from you. Right, so I'm sorry about the initial hiccup with the internet, something which has rarely happened, but anyway, there was some problem here in this area, I think. So, any questions? I think I will stop there now because we have run out of time. Priyat? Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir, for that most insightful and thought-provoking session. Even though we had some technical difficulties, I'm sure that all the participants would agree that was the insight that you gave us through that lecture would be very valuable in their future academic careers. Even I myself learned a lot of new things, some mistakes that I was also doing during this, even when preparing for exams. So I'm also a person who does not do a lot of questions. So like that, I also learned a lot, and I'm sure all the participants here would have also learned. So thank you very much, sir, for taking your time amidst your busy schedules to take your time to do this session for us. So now we would like to move on to the question and answer session. If you have any questions, you can direct them through the chat.
Yeah, once you get the chat box, you ask me the question. It will be easy because I'm on the phone. Yeah.
So there's one question in the chat. Sir, how to study if someone is having ADHD-like behavior when the Pomodoro method does not work?